We in our church enjoy blessing after blessing after blessing. Sometimes we have so many wonderful blessings to enjoy that you just have to stop and breathe and really think about the greatness of God. But through the seasons of our church, man, I tell you, we've had some challenging things. Bobby and I leading our church have had some pretty dark days to lead the church through. And we thank God always for an unbelievable church in terms of your consistency and support. But I think for me personally, the most grief-filled time, in many ways anyway, when it came to leading our church was in 1995, so it's almost 15 years ago. And we, even then, we really had it in our heart to really be a church whose praise and worship was sung by the church and, believe for the praise to go out and around the world. And it was beginning at the time to happen. And in 1995, we recorded an album, whatever that album was called that year. 1 year later, we recorded what I think might have been God Is in the House. And almost all of the key people who 1 year before had been part of our church and part of the worship ministry were gone. As a matter of fact, within a few months, they were recording another live worship album somewhere else in another church nearby here. And as I look at it and think about it, the drummer, he was gone. The bass player was gone. The lead guitarist was gone. The keyboard player was gone. The worship leader was gone. Quite a number of the frontline singers were gone. The guy who played the brass was gone. The sound man was gone. I mean, it really was a tough time. And I can remember, just for me personally, just a sense of confusion, didn't really understand exactly what was happening. And in terms of the size of the church, it was only a small group of people, but there were significant people, and it was a big deal. And I remember feeling a literal grief over friendships and over the situation, and also just a sense that something had come to an end in a devastating way. And the church moved on, but here's the amazing thing. Pretty well that week, a 16-year-old girl wrote a song called Jesus, What a Beautiful Name. One of the great songs that came out of the life of this church. Pretty well exactly at that time, a young Baptist guy came up from Melbourne called Reuben Morgan and wrote songs on the next album like, This Is My Desire, Let the Weak Say, I Am Strong. Darlene Check stepped up to the plate, and the rest is history. And you know what's something? Yeah, it can be so easy to look and say, well, that was all obvious, but it wasn't. It actually wasn't. No. I would so, in my own strength, have wanted to hold on to an old wineskin and believing that all that God was going to do was in a wineskin. But the reality is, and this is no disrespect to any individual or any person, this is about the principle. The truth is that the old wineskin was not going to handle the new wine that God had for us, and that's the way it is in life. That's the way it is often in our own lives, and we are wanting to hold on to the familiar and the old wineskin, not understanding that the way that God works, the way creation works. Creation was not just a repeat one day of the following day. No, out of every night came a day, and every one of those days was progressive. In other words, one day built on the last day, which built on the last day. But what God does is cyclical. In other words, after every summer, there's an autumn, and after every autumn, there's a winter, and after every winter, there's a spring, and then there's a summer, and then there's an autumn, then there's a winter. There's a day, and then there's a sunset, and there's a night, and there's a sunrise, and there's a day, and there's a sunset. Everything God does, whether it's seed and harvest, whether it's any other thing, when it comes to creative things, God does things in a cyclical way. And if we have an expectation that the blessing of God means in our life unbroken success, just never facing any challenges, never facing any tough days, then the first time that you face a loss or a seeming negative or a darkness, an evening, you're going to feel like God abandoned you. You're going to feel like God's word doesn't work. You're going to feel like God left you behind. But the reality is many times the old wineskin was simply not going to contain what's ahead. And whilst there's certain things in our life that are irreplaceable, like loved ones and people, it doesn't mean because a season is over that God has finished working in you. And if we can just realize that the way that God works means, yes, there are seasons in every human being's life. Every human being's life. And all you have to do is live long enough to find out that that's the truth. But the great thing about God is that his faithfulness and his higher eternal purpose means that God can use things for his glory, and often he takes away because there is something to be established that is greater, more wonderful, more powerful, and that's what I would love to speak into your life.